very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this, our first summer talk of Orkney Archaeology Society. It seems an awful long time since we've had an in-person talk. We've been mixing our talks between online, Zoom and in-person, and it suddenly seems a long time since we've been together in person, so welcome to this talk tonight. If you don't know me, I'm David Dreamer, I'm the chair of the Archaeology Society, and our speaker tonight is Dr George Prew, who works for the Treasure Trove Unit of the National Museums of Scotland. I'd love to work for a Treasure Trove Unit. What a title! What a title! He's going to be talking to us about finds in Orkney, but I think he's also going to tell us something about the Treasure Trove Unit and maybe about Treasure Trove itself, because it's an area that is surrounded by mythology and probably misinformation. So I hope we're going to find out something local, but something also general. And looking around the room tonight, I can see professional archaeologists, I can see semi-professional metal detectorists, and I can see enthusiastic amateurs and lay persons like myself. So you've got a mixed ability audience.
Perfect.
George will talk for about 40 or 45 minutes, and we'll take any questions and any conversation or discussion after that. And following that, we have, of course, a raffle. Those of you who bought raffle tickets, it will ensure that you stay to the end. And the last thing I want to say is a particular welcome to you, because you've turned out on the night when one of the home teams is playing the semi-final of the European football. I know some of you will be bored out of Scotland and your football, but I know there'll be others amongst you that will be quite keen to maybe get home and watch the recording of it or watch it. So I'm telling you now, if any of you are looking at your phones in the course of the meeting and pick up scores, we want questions at the end to George, but we don't want any information about football. Leave it until we all get home and we can watch it. So with this George's introduction, it's over to you, George. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is the... Sorry, do I press the button on the microphone? Or?
I'm not sure if the microphone's.
Let's find out. Hello. Oh, I think the microphone's on. Well, thank you very much for that very full introduction. That was fantastic. And for myself, it's very unusual that I'll be missing the archers at 7 o'clock. So thank you all so much for coming out. As you say, I'm George Prew. I'm a Treasure Trove Officer. And as you say, we're going to have a bit of a discussion of who we are, what we do, what Treasure Trove means. And once we've gone through that, I'm just going to have a nice kind of discussion, run through of some of the objects which have been claimed from Orkney in the past few years, because it's been a few really brilliant years for Orcadian archaeology, for Orcadian Treasure Trove. So, starting off, what is the Treasure Trove Unit? Well, we're a group of professional archaeologists who are based at the National Museum of Scotland, but we are under the purview of the King's and Lord Treasurer's Remembrances Office. So that is the kind of legal proxy for the King in Scotland. And Treasure Trove works based on the Scottish common law principle of bona vacantia, ownerless goods, or goods with no known owner, as it's often called. So that's the concept that any object with no known owner so that's effect anything you'll find metal detecting, a lot of things you'll just find, if you find an axe head on the ground when you're walking the dog, or that sort of thing. All the stuff which clearly once belonged to someone, clearly has sort of passed out of ownership one way or another. That all belongs to the Crown, which in the modern era effectively means it belongs to the people of Scotland, that no individual owns it, that it is available to everyone. Scotland has no finders keepers laws, despite the surprising amount of emails we get from people thinking that there is. So importantly, that means that we only deal with artifacts. Artifactual material made or modified by human intervention, as we say there. So again, in terms of a lot of the emails that we get, we don't deal with stones, we don't deal with fossils. If you found human bones, call the police, and then call your local authority archaeologist once the police say there's nothing to worry about. And again, we work for the KLTR, proxies for the King in Scotland, and we only deal with objects found in Scotland. We can't do anything with objects which have been found just outside Scotland, or Scottish objects like a Malcolm IV coin found in Norway or something. Again, another question we've got in the past. So the effect of this is that by law, everything ownerless in Scotland needs to come through us. And what do we do with it then? Well, this is a simplified diagram of what happens. My boss tried making a full diagram of what can happen, and it was too big for an A3 sheet of paper. I think that she had to print it off on A2. But by and large, when someone tells us that they've found something, usually by email, often attaching pictures so that we can decide whether it is of important, we decide whether that object seems significant, whether it's likely old, what it might be, whether it's in relation to anything important, whether it's what we call diagnostic. So can we get information from this thing, or even if it is old, is it just a bit of old iron that we're never going to be able to tell what it once was? So then, if we decide it is diagnostic, then we get it in to record and research there, and everything that we record and research goes into our online database available there at treasuretrovescotland.co.uk. It looks like that. It currently works. It's going to work better. That's all I'm going to say. But importantly, that means that everything that comes in, whether we disclaim it or claim it, goes onto a publicly available database. Everything is available for research. Everything is available to everyone to use in whatever they may be interested in. If an object is not terribly significant, not nationally or regionally significant, as we say, then we disclaim it and hand it back to the finder. And that means that we give the finder a certificate saying that we've seen and recorded the object, and the finder has done their legal duty, and they can now treat it as if they own it. So they can hold on to it, they can do whatever they like with it, they can sell it if they want, and the certificate means that you're allowed to do that. For more significant, and that incidentally accounts for maybe 80 to 90% of objects which get handed in. For more significant objects, however, which belong in a museum, we claim them, which means that we write up a more detailed report. We put a pound value on it based on how much it's gone for previously at auctions or is currently going for at auctions, similar objects. We're going to get on to differences with the English system in a moment, but the fact that England don't consider everything we consider claimable is actually quite useful for being able to find those auction comparanda. And the museums across Scotland can then apply to have the object allocated to them. It then goes to SAFAP, the Scottish Archaeological Finds Allocation Panel, who are an independent review group who make the final decisions on what the valuation should be and which museums should get them, with a strong emphasis on local museums getting objects. Pretty much there will only be an overruling of that if, or not even really an overruling, pretty much something's only going to go to the National Museum if other people don't want it, or if the local museum, for whatever reason, can't take it. And then we get into more difficult things when two local museums want things, and then it's like, ooh, why? What can each museum do with these things? But again, that's all above our heads in SAFAP. And then it gets allocated to a museum to store and display at their will. The museum pays the pound value that's decided to the King's and Lord Treasurer's Remembrances Office, who then give that to the finder as what's called an ex gratia award, which is essentially kind of a gift. Phew, right. So the other things we work with are excavation assemblages. So professional archaeologists in the room will know about this. It's the other main form of objects we deal with. So the others we call chance finds. These are assemblages, and final reports all get sent over to us. Once the assemblages are what we kind of call museum ready, they're ready to go to a museum. Otherwise, it's all largely similar. So aside from the fact that we don't do the research, museums still apply for the assemblage, SAFAP still allocate. And just as with chance finds, excavators can't sort of donate their assemblages without it coming through the process. It all needs to kind of be centrally logged before it gets allocated to a museum. And of course, excavators don't get an ex gratia award because it's part of their professional duty. Moving on to what I alluded to earlier, this is a different system from what is followed in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. They follow the Treasure Act 1996, which requires that an object be made from metal and be over 200 years old. In a recent change to the Treasure Act, it used to be that it needs to be, oh, crikey, I can't remember, over 10% precious metal and 300 years old, I think. So you get odd things like Viking wooden containers or chests or the like wouldn't be treasure in England if it doesn't also include some gold nails or something. In England, the award, the ex gratia award, is split automatically 50-50 between the finder and the landowner. In effect, that's what happens a lot in Scotland as well, but you need landowner permission to metal detect. So a lot of people get a written agreement with the landowner before they start metal detecting, saying that if I find anything, it will go 50-50. It's just a sort of difference in how it's done on our level. And in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, it's decentralised. So the TTU team are all based in Edinburgh. In England, Wales, Northern Ireland, you have finds liaison officers who are kind of the first port of call, and they look after sort of a couple of counties each and are based in those counties. And then if something is treasure, if something is claimed, it goes centrally to the British Museum where they have a smaller treasure team who work just on those. So they have a lot more people working on it, essentially. And also they have to deal with a lot fewer objects because of everything that we've just been saying about a lot fewer things are treasure trove. If you go on finds.org or the Portable Antiquities Scheme database, they will still have a lot of things on there which aren't treasure, but those have all been registered voluntarily rather than it being a legal system. So that's what we're not. Who are we? We are, and ignore Jenny from the Shetland Museum there. She's lovely, but not part of Treasure Trove. That's just a photo, the easiest photo of three of us there is. So you've got me, you've got my manager, Emily, and my colleagues, Janelle, Sophie, Carl, and Anthony. And we have two kind of, well, our function is to work through the objects, do outreach like this, get out into places, get objects in, get objects back to people, do all of the stuff to get it on the database, do all the stuff to get it through the claim system, disclaim system. But we have also specialized a bit, having grown. I'll go into this a bit in a moment, but it used to just be two people until about 2 years ago when we ballooned into 6 of us. And so Emily, of course, looks after all of us. And we all have specialisms. Anthony is a Romanist. Carl is very good on coins. Sophie has rings and silver and jewelry in general. Janelle is very big on standing stones and the like. And I tend to deal with weird bits of lead. I came in having done a PhD on the Etruscans in Italy. So you take what you're given. But bits of lead are actually really interesting, so I win. Also heraldry. Heraldry's so good. I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but heraldry is really interesting. And we also each have local areas as a kind of, in a bit of what they have with the sort of flow system, we now have particular focuses. So I am the Treasure Trove Officer looking after Orkney, Shetland, Moray, and the Lothians, which means that I get to have wonderful trips like this. And to give you a sense of the sorts of things we tend to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and I feel to give you, as a kind of palate cleanser before we get on to the nice things, which are going to be in the following ones, the sorts of things we get loads and loads and loads of are here lead shot, lead spindle wall. That's, I think, a waster from window cames for, what's the word I'm looking for, stained glass. Again, does it show that I'm the person who has to deal with a load of lead stuff? We've got a spur rowel here, a pot leg, buckle, and a communion token there. So that's sort of stuff we deal with a lot on a daily basis. And again, a lot of what we do is sitting in our office, processing those, and talking to finders and the like. Something which is a bit more of a, a special case is when we need to go and excavate. So if any hoards or the like are found in situ, they need to be left in the ground so that we can excavate them, because we can lose a lot of information if, as has happened before, you get worried that the cows in the next field are going to eat it, so you just pull all the coins out of the ground and we lose what the coins might have been held in, or where all the coins might have been in relation to each other, that sort of thing. So if you find anything like a load of coins, if you find a few coins and think there are more down there, getting more readings, do leave it in the ground and call us and we can excavate. So as an example, here's a photo of me at Abbey St Bathans last year, which was a pretty much a textbook dig. A finder had found Roman decorations and rivets, and you can see one of the rivets there, and he was getting more readings under the ground. And when we got the objects in, they were very clearly connected to each other. So we decided that they were significant. I, my colleague Anthony, and Fraser Hunter from NMS all went and excavated it over the course of 4 days. We found the remaining pieces in the ground, and we got a really wonderful sense of the history of the hoard. So the objects were in a peat layer with large stones leading up to it. So it looks like they were deliberately placed right at the edge of a kind of watery context with this kind of platform leading to it. So it gives just another piece of our sort of knowledge of the ritual landscape in Roman Scotland, which, again, would have been completely lost if we had just got the objects in without any of the context. So that's great, and we can deal with these. They're part and parcel of the job. We also get some more disruptive things. So this is the Peebles hoard, which came up in Peeblesshire and the borders. It came up during the lockdown, and once again, Finder was brilliant, got in touch with us as soon as he knew that this was probably a hoard. And this was before my time, but my boss went out with a couple of colleagues and was digging into it through all the wind and the rain and the COVID and everything. 3 weeks of digging, it all ended up getting block lifted in the end. So the whole thing, as a block, was raised out of the ground, and it was first scanned and then excavated in a lab to avoid losing any information of any of the tiny, tiny, tiny objects which made up this thing. There were loads of absolutely tiny, minuscule rivets. And because of this, we can get some of these lovely bits of info from the hoard, or about the hoard. And here you see something else which we really only get from excavation, which is organics. It had surviving textiles under this netted gauze here. And the gauze was added to try and to keep the organics in place while they continued to excavate. If you're interested, I think there have been recent articles on the Peebles hoard, because it is just about going through, I think it went through at the last SAFAP, so a lot of excited descriptions going around. So what this assemblage really highlights is what can be achieved when everything is done as it should when a hoard is found. Again, all of this great information, this remarkable thing, And we had a chance to work with the metal detectorist and local experts on the whole thing, getting it all out of the ground, getting this sort of new information about Peebles as an area. It also highlights what an unpredictable job this is, because you never know when a Peebles hoard is going to come up. You never know when an Abbey St Bathans hoard is going to come up and require 4 days of work, or, again, this one, a month for at least 2 people. And that can be a bit of a difficulty because we're also seeing a lot more fines coming up. So this is a graph of fines handed to Treasure Trove each year. I should note 2022 is a bit skewed because a hoard of 8,000 coins was handed in then. So it should be down about here, at which point you have quite a worrying upswing. And what the graph doesn't show is that 2018 was already quite a big spike from the years before it. And there's a lot of reasons for this, one of which is that metal detecting is great. Like, it's a fun hobby, a lot of people enjoy it. It became very big during lockdown because it's something you can do which gets you out of the house. You can do it alone. It's kind of ideal. But then everything which was found needed to come in, and so you suddenly got this wave of things coming in 2022. The other is that metal detectors themselves are getting a lot better. When the last Treasure Trove review happened in the early 2000s, metal detecting just really wasn't as much of a hobby. So we are dealing, and again, it's a good problem to have because we like people to be engaged with their heritage, and that's what we're seeing here. So we have adapted by gaining 4 people. So we're all the ones who were originally hired to deal with that backlog, which is objects handed in since the beginning of 2022. We've now found that there's another backlog after that, of course, of things which have been handed in since 2022 because it didn't slow down. So we are working through as much as we can, and we're working through it better through things like having our particular places to look after. And the other is that we've got another Treasure Trove review happening now, and they are hoping that this will bring about some real change in how Treasure Trove is worked in Scotland. So it's not going to change the law. It's still going to be the same, everything needs to be handed in, etc. But it is finishing up its 1 year of consultation, and in September it will pass into 1 year of implementation. And the review team are working through kind of every element of how Treasure Trove works, trying to see how it can be made better, more efficient, just work a lot better. And we very much look forward to hearing their recommendations, slightly trepidatiously, in September. So that is Treasure Trove. That's who we are, that's what we do, and it's time for the main event. We've had some really brilliant fines allocated through SAFAP in the last few years, which were originally from Orkney, and I believe all of these have ended up going through the claims process, or we have a few which are currently going through the claims process, still awaiting claim, and where they have already been allocated. Siobhan can keep me right on this if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they've all gone back to the Orkney Museum. So, for the latter half of the talk, before questions, I would like to give you a whistle-stop tour of Orkney's heritage through the lens of its recently acquired treasure. So, beginning with some of the earliest objects, we reach right back to the Paleolithic, or the earliest Stone Age, dating around 50,000 to 10,000 BCE, for this lovely hand axe made of flaked flint, found on the beach here in Kirkwall. Not too many of these are known from Scotland, and it's not absolutely certain that this example is originally from Scotland. Something which is just great about archaeology in general, I feel, and especially about chance finds coming through Treasure Trove, is that they have these long histories. So, this thing was made into an axe maybe 12,000 to 52,000 years ago, but it's had a history since then. And we don't really know whether this axe was made by a Paleolithic Orcadian and dropped, or whether it came from somewhere else, somewhere completely different, as ballast in a ship in kind of the medieval to modern periods, and was then just dropped on the beach in Orkney, wherever they were filling up with cargo. So we're starting here both with an extremely old object and one which has potentially travelled quite a way, as well as just a really pretty one, and something which I think is quite sort of emblematic of just kind of the vagaries of the stuff which comes through Treasure Trove. Moving to the Neolithic, for which, of course, Orkney is famous. We have a late Neolithic pestle-type mace head, which was found relatively near the Ring of Brodgar, and unusually, as you can see here, it was found intact. Sure, you all know, most of these are found broken, fragmented, often deliberately before they were deposited, and could have had a number of uses. I mean, the function of these is still a point of debate. Certainly it could easily have been a weapon. I mean, just imagine getting hit with that thing. And you can see that it has the kind of pecking on one side, showing that it would certainly work for that, has certainly potentially been used for that. But equally, clearly it could have been a nice bit of display item. I originally come from dress archaeology, so I always like to bring this out, but it would have looked really good at your side, in your hand. It's just a nice, prestigious object to have. And that's something which it shares with this barbed and tanged arrowhead just below it, probably from a bit after the mace head, 1500 to 800 BCE. And once again, clearly a functional object. And it would work as an arrowhead, but similarly, it's made from this beautiful stone, which makes it quite likely that the arrowhead was also decorative, possibly worn, maybe sewn into clothing. That's something you get a lot in sort of Bronze Age burials across Europe. But just because it was called the Stone Age doesn't mean that everyone used stone. So here are some of my favorite. It's a representative sample of some of the nice little weirdos you get from the Bronze Age. And I promise we'll get to nice looking things in the next slide again. I like these ones. But for now, on the top left here, we have a fragment of pottery, which is the sort of thing which can really cause trouble for us, trying to put objects into their original context, because courseware like this, you can make courseware throughout history. You do still get some pottery like that, looking like that into sort of the late medieval, but often this sort of one is sort of late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, that sort of thing. And these large inclusions, this sort of unprocessed clay, you see it a lot all over the place. But if we're being sort of very careful, I'd probably put sort of a date of 4000 BCE to 1600 CE. But all went through and was claimed because it was it seemed to have been from a historically important context. Alongside the pottery, we have possibly my two favourite objects, because I don't know if we see cramp outside of Orkney. Certainly I've not seen it discussed much outside of Orkney. But I really love cramp. If you're not entirely aware, this is a product of burning seaweed. It's something you get a lot with late Neolithic to Bronze Age cremations here in Orkney. And yes, they're small pieces of vitrified seaweed, often containing small particles of sand, sometimes containing little bits of human remain, which sometimes appear to have been collected deliberately, either as waste from the cremation or as a form of human remains in themselves, with sort of the seaweed being placed there to collect things which you'd usually lose in cremation. And I just find that fantastic, this sort of different approach to what human remains are, to what kind of the human body is. And it's very much kind of embodied in these objects. And it's a headache for Treasure Trove, because as discussed earlier, did I discuss earlier? Yes, I did briefly mention earlier. Human remains can't be treasure trove because you can't own humans. You can't own human bodies or any part of them. And so it creates difficulties for objects like this, where they are clearly created by human hands or modified by human hands, but also may incorporate human remains, but it would require, study even to figure out whether they do include them or not. And so they went through, and it can be dealt with at the museum where they are best equipped to do that. And then we have another strange one, but this undecorated polished earth ball, which was found as a loose find in Skara Brae, which is, of course, a scheduled monument. So something which I didn't mention earlier, it is illegal to metal detect or to search for objects on scheduled monuments and take objects away. But in this case, it was someone visiting Scale and who found it, handed it over to, was it you, Siobhan? Yes, handed it over to Siobhan and to stop it getting lost or damaged, which we do encourage. So don't go looking for things on scheduled monuments, but you can't imagine the amount of things which have come out of like the spoil of badger sets or rabbit holes in scheduled monuments. But yes, these polished earth balls found at various Orcadian Neolithic sites. You can see them in the lovely catalogue of the Nessa Brodka exhibition at the Orkney Museum. And there's a lot of theories about what they could have been. Gaming pieces is one of the perennial ones. I really like the theory based on similar examples from Çatalhöyük in Turkey, where they have things like this, where they've clearly been burned, that they might have been a heat pad for pots, whether to make a kind of grill or just to place hot pots once you've taken them off the fire. I think that's really lovely. So that was a really interesting set of old functional objects which bring out this diversity of experiences in the ancient world. And the kind of diversity of aspects of ancient life that chance finds, the sorts of things which constantly come through Treasure Trove can teach us about, which is, once again, not to bang on about it, but really a strength of the Scottish system, that these things do all come through us and do all get put onto a database, are also publicly available to be studied. And as promised, we have got back to pretty things. We have a beautiful gold object. In fact, it's gold sheet wrapped over a copper alloy core from about 1500 to 800 BCE. We know some of these from other contexts across Britain and across North Europe, in fact, and we know from these comparisons that the ring was probably originally the same thickness all the way around, but in this one, the copper alloy has corroded pretty heavily, and you can see it's burst out at the back here. So it's kind of corroded out of its gold shell. These rings are often called hair rings, though their precise function isn't known. It's quite likely that they were decorations of some kind. We kind of go back to the mace head and the arrowhead, these beautiful possible dress objects, displays of your wealth. The date of this ring makes it highly likely it relates to a nearby settlement, and you might have noticed this one is actually a sneak preview as well. It doesn't have a TT number, which is the number we give to finds once they go through the SAFAP system. It is awaiting its day in SAFAP, probably, I think this one's going through in December, but it just has our internal TTDB number. But it seemed a real shame not to include it in the talk. Give you a nice sneak peek. Moving forward in time a bit, we have some rather unusual... Oh, sorry, actually I should mention, you can also search on our online database using these numbers as well as the claim numbers, just so as you know. Moving forward in time a bit, we have some rather unusual finds for Orkney. 3 Roman coins. Above, we have a silver denarius of the Emperor Hadrian. I promise they are silver, they just came out this colour. And on the right, we have Trajan, both early 2nd century CE, and below we have a copper alloy as likely of Domitian, but it was pretty obliterated, who ruled in the latter half of the 1st century CE. So, this is weird, since the Romans didn't especially hang around Orkney all that much, conquered parts of Scotland, got at least to the north of it, but we don't have much documentary evidence of them coming up to Orkney. So these may have got here by lots of different means. We come back to that whole how do chance finds end up in places. They could have been traders or travellers coming to Orkney with them in their pockets, later collectors losing them, antiquarians, maybe even the Victorian period, which is a way that a lot of Roman coins ending up where we don't expect them is kind of dismissed feels unfair, but it feels like it's the answer you get for a lot of that. And I feel like it's nice to entertain all the other options. Because these were beach finds. They could even have just washed up from a Roman sunken ship from some other part of the empire, or some part of the empire. We just don't know. So while on the one hand it's frustrating, on the other it, again, presents a real benefit of a system that these individual Roman coin finds, which you wouldn't have to declare in, well, you'd have to declare those two because they're silver, but you wouldn't have to declare them in England. You do get here, they are all data points available to people. Moving on, again a bit in time, we continue on the theme of wonderful but humbler treasure trove objects. We have two dress fastenings from the late medieval period, about 1300 to 700 CE. Beginning on the left here, these annular brooches were popular across Europe in the 13th and 14th centuries, simple way of fastening garments. At the neck, while they fell out of fashion elsewhere, the preference continued in Scotland until the 1700s. We can see them more rarely in Orkney, though, so it's really wonderful to have this example come through, especially given how nicely decorated it is. It doesn't come through properly in here, but it's got a nice sort of leaf decoration going around it. You can just about see there. On the right is one of my favourite objects we get in, a less common dress object, a quadruped buckle. So it is probably a lion or the like, but with its head sort of worn away. It would originally have been looking back at its, known from other examples of a similar type. Most likely it would be looking back at its tail, which it would probably be grabbing onto, creating another loop here. But you can just see sort of two legs at the front, two legs at the back, little ribs there, and then the head.
That's Kevin's.
Hey, fantastic. Well, you gave one of my favourite objects. Ah, well, 2012, so before my time, so I blame whoever took the photo. So we know about 15 of these from across Scotland. So they're also relatively rare, and they've all been found by people either metal detecting or just turning up in fields. I hope I'm not wrong on this one by now. That's the latest information I have, but that's quite a nice one because it's just such a lovely type of object, and it's the one which currently only comes up through Treasure Trove, so it's just such a nice thing. Honestly, I really wish they'd come back into style. The dress objects are precisely the sort of thing which Treasure Trove tend to deal with because they're meant to be worn. So these ones are actually quite unusual in that the pins are still there. Really, really often we'll get brooches, we'll get buckles with the pins worn away or broken off. You kind of get a bit of a sense of the story of, okay, so this hopped off someone's clothes and wasn't found. We don't quite know why these ones ended up in the ground. Could also have just fallen off, could have been deliberately thrown away. Someone might have thrown away their lion buckle in a fit of pique, who knows. But getting back to more particularly Orcadian objects, we have some lovely bone, and honestly, I can't talk tonight, I apologise. Orkney does bone better than anywhere in Scotland. We have this lovely bone comb on the side here, which is a fishtail or butterfly type, type 13, dating to the late to early 14th century CE. The comb consists of plates, which are on, the comb consists of two plates either side, and then ungraduated teeth. So the teeth on a single side are all the same size, but then they have different size between the two. So you have these thicker ones here, thinner ones there. This was most likely a regular hair comb, I'd say, since we always need one of those. Could have been for humans, could have been for animals, who knows. Ones which you use for weaving, because you do get those, tend to be long-handled, but I'm perfectly willing to apologize if I am wrong on that one, and this is clearly a weaving comb or something. Below, we have a bit of a mystery object, and I feel bad for not putting one of the lovely bone pins which come from Orkney here, but if you want to see lovely bone pins, you can go to Orkney Museum or Stromness Museum. There are loads and loads around. Here's just a really weird one which came through, because we don't know what it is. It's an incomplete polished bone point or pin, no contextual information other than it came from a location of Poole on Sanday. It is subtriangular in shape and tapering at one end. The opposite end is broken, specifically across this perforation. It's too big to be a needle, too small to be a beater or anything like that. So we just don't have much of a sense of what its function was, aside from that it could have been worn because of this perforation. It would have been very pretty, but we're not quite sure. If you have any ideas, do bring them up in the question section. And on the right here, we have an object whose function we definitely know. It's just a die. It's a complete regular D6 with pips denoting the numbers 1 to 6 on different faces, the opposite faces each amounting to 7, so very much the type we know. The pips are in a form used from the Roman period to the present day, so we can date it to 100 CE to about 2000 CE. People can always make a nice bone die, and I recommend you all do. It is Potter's Type 13, because apparently there is a typology for bone dice, the things you learn in this job. And the stability of the general forms, as I say, just makes it a bit of a headache for us. Contextually, though, it's from an eroding midden, and it was from an area which had definite habitation from the 12th century CE through the medieval period, but likely habitation from the Iron Age. So still, absolutely no help. Moving on, we have a type of object which usually has a lot more contextual information for us. And sorry, I do realize I'm getting near the end of my time, but this is a vesica seal matrix. It's the vesica shape, which is common for clergy, this kind of oval shape. It is a suitably pious image on the third of it that we can see, and I'm referring to this one. So it's a man kneeling in robes. He is under an arch, and we know from other examples that there would have been a depiction of the Madonna and Child above, or else possibly a particular other saint. The inscription is unfortunately illegible, which is a shame, because they can give us really close connections to figures from the past. So as an example, I decided to head over the water to Caithness for this one, which is in its own little box. It's actually from Moray, so I came across it in my work on Moravian material, and it's from the Bishop's Palace in Spiny in Elgin, near Elgin, and it shows, as you can see, a monk robed with what looks like possibly a tonsure. He's holding a book, and it says Rickard, then a break, S. Rickard, so seal of Rickard, and then the Catanier, which is an old version of Caithness. So it's Richard of Caithness. Happily, we have just enough of it to be able to read it. And it can be linked to a known historical figure, who is Richard, Dean of Caithness, who was Dean 1274 to 1278 CE and briefly Bishop of Caithness in 1279 CE. Briefly because we know him only from a single papal letter in which the Pope says, there have been complaints from a couple of bishops who are your neighbours that you have 2 illegitimate sons who are serving in your church. We're not firing you, but we'd like you to step down. And it seems he did. And isn't that brilliant? So this is someone we know from a single text, not necessarily him, but it really fits, doesn't it? It's really nice. And it's from the Bishop's Palace at Elgin, so it is somewhere where he wouldn't be a bishop at this point because he's not wearing any of the sort of bishoply regalia, but possibly from his time as a dean. it all fits quite nicely. So you can get some real stories out of seal matrices. Sadly, not this one. So if you can all go out and find some more which have really lovely Orcadian stories attached, please do. Oops, sorry.
Is that the one from Christ Dennis?
No, oh, maybe, actually, yes, I think it might be. I'm terrible at remembering precisely where things are. I could look it up, actually, you can look it up on our database. But if you email, I can look it up. Coming up to the end of our tour, we have two objects which are a lot bigger than anything we've had before. So on the left, we have a rectangular, naturally fractured block of light brown Orcadian flagstone, which measures 2.61 meters long by 0.58 meters wide and weighs around 2 tons. So really stretching what you can consider a portable object. Both of these objects show crosses, with the carving seeming to date possibly early medieval, is most likely. But these may have been carved onto existing prehistoric standing stones, perhaps Pictish from the landscape. And certainly on the left, this stone was located on a naturally visible point on a ridge around 30 meters above sea level, commanding views along the southwest to northeast coast of Sandy across to Stronsay, while to the east, views extended over to Poole, Eddy, and Papawestray, so on a commanding point in the landscape, as I say. Naturally, both of the stones make a really significant contribution to our understanding of the early Christian church in Scotland. I don't know why there's a ghost number on this one, but maybe we can all look up TT 13722 and see if it has any connection. But yes, has clear effects on, it shows the churches have clear effects on the landscape of the effect of Christianization, including this kind of carving onto the existing past that we see in sort of Norse sagas and other bits of culture through to the material culture here. And onto our final object, we have a recent star of the Orcadian. It is returning to the Bronze Age with a beautiful late Bronze Age socketed axe head dating from about 1100 to 800 BCE, found recently at a Bag the Brook event by Mrs. Ingrid Gillespie. Only 3 of these have been found in Orkney so far, including this, and it is such an unusual thing because Orcadians tend to have preferred stone for tools throughout the Bronze Age, as we sort of saw earlier with the mace head. When you have such nice stone, why use metal? So it's likely an import, either literally or figuratively, someone making it with craft traditions from other areas or literally bringing it over. And it's easy to bring. This is another thing which I will take as a dress object, because this loop here isn't just useful for attaching it to the haft of the axe with sort of putting a string through it. You could also put a string through it and just attach it to your belt or something so that you can get rid of the wooden bit, but you still have the important bit of your axe with you whenever you need it. So, from island hopping axe heads all the way through to mace heads and that beautiful lying quadruped buckle. I'm never going to get over it because I just really like it. That was a whistle-stop tour of who we are at the Treasure Trove Unit, what we do, some of the big finds, and let me tell you, there are big boxes of Orkney finds out there, so we are going to fill up again quite soon. Watch this space. If you have anything to deliver to us, if you just want to chat Orkney archaeology, please do get in touch with us at any of the above means, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George. That seemed a very short talk to me, didn't it? I'm looking forward to the rest of it, and I think that's always a sign of he's a very engaging speaker and a fascinating subject. And I could tell from our 2 interruptions that members of the audience had thoughts about what they were seeing, and that's always engaging for the rest of us. Can we take any questions to George on any aspects of the work of the unit, or indeed on any of the artefacts or objects that we've seen? Questions? Who'd like to kick off? Jim Burton. Jim?
Hi. Are the regulations the same concerning marine art?
Are the regulations the same for marine objects? That is a very good question, and one which I should have covered. No. There is actually a completely separate office, the Receiver of Wreck, who are fundamentally, I know, if there's a better name than Treasure Trove, Receiver of Wreck, they're made for, flotsam and jetsam, avoiding wrecking and all that. But if anything is found while diving or the like, we tend to deal with beach objects. There's technically a slight problem of jurisdiction for things like below the tide line. But if you find, say, a shipwreck, those go to Receiver of Wreck. Thank you.
Other questions? Kevin?
Right, the 50-50 split in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, right? Do you say in Scotland, if you all go to the final? And don't think that's right.
The 50-50 split.
So George, could you repeat the question? In case
Absolutely, yes. So the 50-50 split in England and Wales, should we have that in Scotland as well? Because you understood correctly, we don't currently have it in Scotland. So currently, the system works on giving all the ex gratia award to a finder and then kind of expecting that they probably have a deal already. The reasoning for that is pretty much entirely practical, that if someone is the finder, they have the object, and so to get them to hand it over, easiest thing is just to say, you get all of it, and then you can redistribute. But it definitely has been discussed having the half and half, and we are working more with landowners to figure out what's best. Sorry, please continue.
Did something really happen in the Galloway Horde, that's what I'm saying?
The Galloway Horde. Oh, the Galloway Horde. Yes. So there was an issue there because the finder had got permission from the tenant, who was the local priest, to his friend had got permission and he was part of a club, so they were all using each other's permissions. But once the Galloway Hoard was found and excavated, and once the valuation was put on it, it became clear that the Church of Scotland realised that they actually hadn't given permission because they are the landowners, the priest is technically the tenant, and so that got caught in a bigs of legal quagmire for ages and ages and ages. It's recently finished out of court, I believe, so we don't know what's sort of gone on there. It has definitely caused issues in the past, but there are issues with the English system as well, generally in terms of finding out who the landowner is in a lot of cases. And you still get a lot of cases of people. Wonderful metal detectorists in this room. There are some metal detectorists who will metal detect without permission, like deliberately. You still get that in England and Wales, and that's kind of the biggest thing. We're working with landowners to see if there are better ways to kind of get knowledge and the word out.
George, can you just briefly say what the Galloway Hoard is?
Sorry, yes.
But just in case there's anyone who's not quite sure about it.
The Galloway Hoard is the hoard so good that it has caused massive, massive problems anywhere it goes. It is a beautiful sort of Viking Age hoard of a lot of it's hack silver, but then you have these beautiful elements of it, which are crystal and gold and all the sorts of beautiful things that... Put it this way, if something in the National Museum's gift shop isn't based on the Galloway Hoard, it's based on the Lewis chessmen. For good reason, it's beautiful. So, yeah, very, very beautiful hoard. And it was valued... Let's just say it was valued at 7 figures.
And when's the date from, George?
Here's where I show my lack of knowledge. I'm going to say Viking Age, Siobhan. Viking Age, but not all Viking. Perfect. Thank you, Siobhan. And it is now at the National Museum. So the Dumfries Museum were discussing taking it at the time, but it needed so much preservation that it has caused massive funding issues for the National Museum to deal with it. Dumfries Museum just sort of didn't have the capacity. The main sort of funding thing being that it just requires a lot of curators to look after it.
Thank you for that very detailed answer. Any other questions or next question?
I'm just wondering about human remains.
Human remains, yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, say for example you find a skeleton or something, and it's not a murder and recent, and it's known to be very old, and you said that they don't want, it's not wanted.
Not that it's not wanted.
You can take a photo home and put it around your face, is that okay?
I'm going to say no. It's not our jurisdiction is the main thing. So we can only work with this ownerless property, whereas the human body is always owned by the human. We have this weird thing in UK law, which I think also applies to Scottish law, where you can't own a human body, but you can be a carer for it. So if you do find a human remain, as I say, if it's not like clearly ancient, even if it is clearly ancient, do check in with the police just to make sure. And then go to your local museum, go to your local authority archaeologists. They're the people who can deal with it, and they're the people who are the sort of rightful caretakers for it. We have had someone turn up at the museum saying, I've got something amazing to show you. And we said, what is it? And he said, come downstairs to see, because they were calling up. So I was like, okay. Went down, my boss went downstairs, had a sports bag, opened it, there was a human skull inside and clearly more bones beneath. And he said, what do you think of that? And she said, I think call the police. What are you doing?
Then can't ask for it back when someone's had to look at.
The bones?
Yeah, I mean, you know,
It's not usually the first place to go back.
yeah, but whose is it then? What are they going to do?
All of the state.
What are they going to do?
Research it, study it, and keep it, isn't it? It's not yours to begin with. So you can't have it back.
Yeah, so it's for the, yeah, as you say, it's for the museums and the local authority archaeologists to look after it, because we need to make sure that human remains are looked after sort of centrally by, yeah, absolutely. There are people who collect human remains. I wouldn't advise it. No, absolutely.
I know someone in Italy who's got a skull, and she knows it's illegal. They're very secure.
Okay, we'll move on swiftly from that one. Any other questions?
What age do you actually cut off at? If you can't, if somebody found 50p, they're not going to have anything to do. What age? Some of the things that are difficult to tell the age.
What age do we cut off at? Yeah, it's a very good question, one that we are asked a lot. In the review, they were actually asking us what age we cut off at. And the answer to that is that it's not an age question. It's a relevance question. It's a so very technically, we cut off at 20 years, because that is the point. If you throw something away and haven't looked for it since, it falls into ownerlessness, which means that you can't just steal someone's wedding ring, stick it in the bin, and say, well, you threw it away, therefore it's ownerless now. But if you lose your wedding ring and don't look for it for 20 years, technically it becomes bona vacantia. It wouldn't actually be pressed at all, but that's technically how the law works. The big thing about any cut-off point is that it loses really important things from more modern eras, like if someone's found a Second World War medal in Scotland and it has no clear owner. I mean, again, a problem you get in the last century, well, not a problem, a good thing you get in the last century is that things become a lot easier to trace. If you find a ring, there's a good chance you might know which family it belongs to. But, you know, we trust people. we trust them. We're looking into doing more messaging, essentially, so that people know precisely what is and is not sort of the best thing to give us. But we tend to say, like, not old iron brew bottles, not old crisp packets, which, I mean, our metal detectorists will probably tell you. You find a lot of weird old stuff, but a lot of people think that we don't want musket balls, for example, because they're relatively modern, who's going to get information from them? But there are people who research musket balls, and if you get the 10-figure grid reference, and that's what we, incidentally, should note, if you find anything, please use what3 words or a mapping app or something, get the 10-figure grid reference so that we know precisely where it's from, both because if we need to excavate, that's really important, and because knowing where something is in relation to other things is really important. So if we find a load of musket balls in a field, it's so different if they're sort of evenly spread out compared to all at one end of the field, compared to, clearly in two lines where it might be evidence of a Highland battle or the like. So there's no real dating cutoff for most things. For coins, we tend to say probably about 200 years, maybe 300 years. But the biggest thing is, if you're not sure, just email us a photo of it and we can say yes or no. Yes?
Is there a value cut off? Like, there are so many flints and hammerstones.
Is there a value cutoff? Is a good question. Sorry, is there a value cutoff, to give a clear version of that? We do have a lot of flints, we do have a lot of hammerstones and the like, but if it is clearly human worked, if it is clearly an artifact, then we do still consider it consequential. We may not claim it, but especially sort of big assemblages of it and the like, if it's a flake, the biggest thing is that if it's retouched, if it's clearly got sort of bits on the outside, sort of sharpening it or the like, if it clearly is being used as a tool rather than sort of a bit of waste from it, from the creation of a flint tool, then yeah, absolutely we would put it on our database. So there's not really a value cutoff, because kind of the idea of the database is to get everything as much as possible. Thank you.
I've never understood this 10% silver gold. It's true, like Roger's asset, as you know, so what's the point of it?
The precious metal content, 10% silver or gold, necessity in, I will say, the old Treasure Act in England and Wales. It no longer needs to be precious metal, so Bronze Age axe heads are treasure under the new version of the Treasure Trove Act because they are still metal. They do still need to be metal as far as I understand it. I don't really understand it either, but not to cheerlead too hard for it. This is a really nice thing about the Scottish system, is that we're not bound by that sort of thing where it's just not very clear why.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, again, thank you, George, for your informed and extremely engaging talk. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.